Hi, my name is Michael Shirkin, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Pax Americana, a conversation about world affairs, global conflict, military strategy, and anything else that happens to be on my mind. I had the honor recently of being able to interview French General Hervé Pierre on the subject of the French military strategist General André Beaufre. Beaufre is my favorite French military strategist. I think he's the best of the 20th century, and it's something that I share a passion for both with General Pierre. Of course, General Pierre is really the expert on the subject. Because of the length of the interview, I decided to cut the interview into two separate sections. So this section, part one, we talk about the general approach to military strategy that General Beaufre had. It's sort of, if you will, the philosophy of military strategy. Then in the subsequent video, part two, we're going to talk about the Suez Crisis, the role that Beaufre had in the Suez Crisis, and the lessons that Beaufre derived from the Suez Crisis for military strategy. Thank you. Today on my channel, I have the honor of speaking with General Hervé Pierre in the French army, who, among other things, happens to share my passion for General André Beaufre. Perhaps even more so, he recently published this absolutely fantastic biography of Beaufre that, if you can read French, I highly recommend reading this book. It's very, very, very good. So I wanted to take the opportunity to speak with General Pierre and to ask him questions about Beaufre that are based on my reading. But first of all, actually, before I do that, I just thought I could maybe ask you to introduce yourself. Like, who are you and what do you do?
Yes, thank you very much, Michael, for this invitation. I'm very interesting in speaking about the French strategists in general, and of course on André Beaufre in particular. And thank you very much for my book. I hope it will be translated soon in English. That allows all your mates to read it in English and not only in French. I'm a French general. I've been spending 33 years in the army now, especially in the Marine Corps. So I had the opportunity to spend 1 year in the States in Quantico when I was attending the Command and Staff College in 08-09. I participated in most of the French operations abroad in Sahel, in Afghanistan, in Lebanon, in former Yugoslavia, for example. But apart from this military career, I had staff positions in Paris, close to the Army Chief of Staff, then to the Prime Minister, and now I'm serving at the Secretary of Defense Cabinet, in charge of the management of the generals. And apart from this, I just written this book on André Beaufre.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So why don't we just get at it? So who is Beaufre, this guy that you've written a biography of? And
Yes.
frankly, why should we be reading him today?
Yeah, Beaufre is a French army general. He's a very famous thinker, mainly known for his first book, An Introduction to Strategy, a book that has been published in 1963. Beaufre was born in 1902 in Neuilly-sur-Seine, very close to Paris, and he died in 1975 when he was engaged in a series of lectures in Yugoslavia. His professional life could be divided into two main parts. The first one is time in the army, 40 years in the forces, and then from 1961, the year he resigned from the army, to his death in 1975, his second career was a career of strategist. As an army officer, he experienced a lot of operations, military operations. The first one was when he was a second lieutenant in the Rif in 1925. He was seriously wounded during this operation. And then World War II, of course. He was very close to the chief of staff in 1940 during the fall of France. He wrote a book about that, a very interesting book. And then he participated to the victory in 1945. He did 2 tours in Indochina, and he was commanding a division in Algeria in 1956, 1956, 1955, 1956. And it was the moment he participated in the Suez operation, Operation Musketeer, in the fall 1956. And then after he resigned, as I said, in 1961, and he took the responsibility of a new think tank called the Institut d'études stratégiques, Institut d'études stratégiques. And during these years, at the head of this institute, he fueled what we call in France a great debate. That was the debate around the French defense model, and specifically about the French model of deterrence. So he's a well-known strategist in France about his contribution to debate about around on deterrence, and specifically with other generals like Ayre, Gallois, Poirier, and we call them the four horsemen of apocalypse. So Beaufre, Ayre, Gallois, and Poirier, and that they are very well known in France for these contributions on the French great debate on deterrence. Then he resigned from this position at the end of the Institut Français d'études stratégiques at the beginning of the 70s, and died in 75, as I said.
Have French officers read him? Like do all French officers read him, or only some? Is this required reading in any of the professional schools?
Is very well known in France, but there is a sort of paradox, because he's only really new known. He is really known for his first book, the bestseller, An Introduction to Strategy. But he wrote 15 books. He wrote several hundreds of articles, and his thinking is really restricted to what he wrote in An Introduction to Strategy. And what is a little bit difficult to understand is that a lot of people in France, a lot of military officers know General Beaufre, but they only know one book, that is An Introduction to Strategy. So there is a paradox about the preeminence of both thinking in France.
Thank you. By the way, for listeners, I've put a link to the PDF of the English translation of the Introduction to Strategy in the description. So it's out of print. It's almost impossible to find, but there's a PDF. Somebody scanned it. So please look below in the description. If you've made it this far, please consider hitting like and subscribe if you have not subscribed already. Plus, also, if you feel so inspired, please consider sending some money my way, either by hitting the thanks button here on YouTube or by buying me a coffee using the link in the description below. Likewise, you can also choose to become a member to provide even more substantive support to the channel, and you can do that by hitting the membership button here in YouTube. That will guarantee that you will count among the coolest people on the planet, and hey, who doesn't want that? But really, thank you. This kind of support is absolutely essential for my being able to do this channel, and there's plenty more in the pipeline, so thank you very much. One of the striking things that I found, I mean, there's a lot of interesting things that I found in your biography, but also in reading Beaufre. Which one of the things is that just thinking about what strategy is in the first place. And there's also this question of whether or not military strategy is a science or an art. So I was wondering if you had any thoughts about where Beaufre came down on that question.
Yes, first of all, I think what is very interesting in Beaufre thinking is that he's thinking strategy in a dynamic way. It is not static. It's not a book of recipes. You enter in strategy, so you have to be in a strategy way of mind to think strategy. This is the first thing. Strategy is dynamic. The second one is not the head of a school. He's a patcher. He's trying to find in several schools what is interesting to think operatively and to face operatively a problem. So it's the mix of what we call in French a strategist, that is the thinker, and the stratège, who is the military commander. he's the incarnation of this of both the strategist and the stratege. From this point of view, so strategy is dynamic, and he has a global appreciation of strategy, what he calls total strategy. That means that in between policy and military strategy, you have to embrace total strategy. In another way, a global approach of strategy. That is to say, to have a very comprehensive approach of the way you have to face your adversary. But within this total strategy, military strategy is first of all a question of will. It is not a question of resources, and that is probably one very interesting point in both works. It is not that he doesn't care with the resources. Resources are very important, of course, and you have to calculate your resources. You have to deal with your resources. But the first thing is that you have to transfer the political will to the military at the strategical level.
That leads me to my next question, which is the balance between matter or material things and will or even spirit, actually. I mean, I've noticed, at least far back as Foch, like Foch disregards material things in his Principe de la Guerre, Principles of War, and sort of says it doesn't really matter. It's not about how many guns you have or how many people. It's really ultimately just about the spirit. And then there's even, he refers to the French conservative Catholic philosopher de Maistre, and talks about how victory is all about will, will, and spirit. So it's almost a Catholic, or perhaps I should say a romantic approach to philosophy. And then in Beaufre, I find a similar thing. I was wondering if you could speak about that, about the sort of the importance of the relative importance of matter versus spirit, but also about calculus, rational calculus versus intuition.
Yes, completely. And it's probably one problem with an introduction to strategy, because it's a very, very short book, easy to read, but it's very, very philosophical book. There are some aspects of material and consideration about resources. There is, for example, an equation in the book about the way you can calculate and ponderate the material on the spirit. But the book is very short, and when the book was published in 1963, there was an article in Survival written by Brodie that attacked Beaufre, saying that it was a book like all the French strategist book written before him, a very philosophical spirit. And Brodie wrote to Beaufre that it was the reason why the French lost the First World War, because they didn't take into account the use of machine gun, for example, of barbed wire, because they were just thinking about will, about spirit, about the strength of the whole nation. And he said, your book is this kind, is the resurgence of this kind of French spirit that is based only on will. And Beaufre was very upset about this remark, and he answered back Brodie saying, you cannot tell me this. I'm a French military stratege. I've just spent 40 years in the military. I gained my stripes. I was on the battlefield in Morocco. I was on the battlefield in World War II. I know exactly what is experience on the ground. And I wrote this book, a very short one, as an introduction. And you have to read the next book to understand what is my thinking. And he said, I tried to make the bridge between the pragmatic perception of vision of war and the spiritual aspect or spiritual perception of war. He wrote to Brodie, I know that the French in the past were probably accused of being a philosopher. I'm a French, but I know very well the Anglo-Saxon world. I know the materialistic aspect of war and the materialistic school, and I'm trying to make the bridge between the will that is really the core of the commitment in war, and the fact that you have to take into account all the means, the ways and means, so the resources, and adapt your tactics and adapt your strategy to the reality of war. And you have to take into account that you've got planes, you've got guns, you've got barbed wire, you've got machine guns, and it's not only a question of will, but will has the preeminence.
I think Brodie wrote something about, he commented that he accused Beaufre of speaking from his intellectual high horse.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I quote this in the book, yes.
Yeah, it's a great line. Brodie's great. So, but then there's the question then. So, in terms of this matter and spirit, I mean, one of the reasons why this is interesting is that it gets to the question of, first of all, how do you even teach strategy? Because if you believe that it's about matter or material, or it's almost a science, then it's like you can teach it the way you teach an engineering class. And there's a tension because people, I mean, Foch wrote about this, but all of them is like, on one hand, there's something to be said for the intellectual discipline. There's something to teach. On the other hand, if this is about spirit or intuition, maybe that can't be taught. So, do you bother teaching strategy or do you not bother teaching strategy? How could you actually teach it if it's a science or it's not a science? Like, where do you? So, Buff, come in with this. Like, what's his approach?
It is very, very difficult and very recurrent point that has been discussed for years. And you know that you've got something about art or science in Clausewitz von Krieg, chapter 3, I think, when where Clausewitz is trying to define a strategy as an art or as a science, saying in fact that they are both, and probably that art is more important than science. And I think that more or less both has this position. That is to say, you have to learn a certain number of things to be able to master the techniques of war and be able to face the revolution of the equipment on the battlefield. The fact that there are new equipments, but you have to do that in the sense that your will be upon the resources and be able to be the main line, the guideline of your mission, the guideline of your strategy. And at the end of the day, I think that both do not deal with all the resources of all the equipment, of all the evolution of war, but at the same time, he's the one that thinks that spirit is preeminent. There is a very famous debate in France between the materialist thinkers and those like Beaufre that put the will as the corner of a strategy. And the best known French thinker about this materialist line is Camille Rougeron. Camille Rougeron was an engineer, and he wrote a book about the fact that everything is about equipment, everything is about techniques, everything is about engineer system, and you have to be able to build the best system to beat your opponent, and then after you will find a way to use them. And Beaufre is saying to Rougeron, you made a mistake. Of course, the evolution of equipment, the possibilities given by the techniques, either tactics, learning tactics and learning the way of using techniques are very important. But the first thing is the will, the national will, and the way you want to transfer the political will to the tactical battlefield. And it is, I think, in both this kind of balance that you can find. You cannot put both into the regime of only spiritual thinker. And if you read the biography, you will notice that he's considered as a Cartesian thinker. And one other article about an introduction on strategy in 1963, apart from the critics, Brodie critics, was an article from Jean Delmas in France, and he was speaking about a new speech of method. He was referring directly to Descartes, saying that Beaufre was very Cartesian in his perspective. But at the same time, he's using probabilities. So he's mixing the Cartesian analysis plus probabilities and the fact that you cannot absolutely know everything in war. So there's a part of uncertainty. And this part of uncertainty is where the genius of the military leader is making the difference. So you've got both sides in both thinking.
Well, so that brings me to another thing that you write about in your biography. You talk about the relationship between Beaufre and Maréchal de Lattre de Tassigny, the one of the heroes of the Free French Army, and also he was briefly commander in Indochina before he died. You describe him as, I believe, Beaufre as somehow trying to put himself between Descartes and de Lattre, with de Lattre being a bit more extreme in the spiritual side, and I believe you associate him with Bergson. So he's like de Lattre, but yet a little Cartesian, or like he's sort of a compromise. I was wondering if you could speak about that and try to explain exactly kind of what you're thinking about the relationship between de Lattre and Beaufre, and then also like what the distinction is between the two men, philosophically speaking.
Yes, I wrote in the book that both had probably two main influences as characters. The first one was Littell, and he took from Littell the concept of indirect strategy, and he was very, very honored by the relationship he had with Littell. They wrote letters for 30 years, from 1935 when they met until the death of Littell. But the other influencer was the great captain was Jean de Lattre, and Jean de Lattre is well known in France to be a very intuitive general, intuitive marshal. He was a kind of guy who had a very strong sense of command, and he had around him a lot of officers that pay a lot to him. I mean, it's like a cour in certain way,
like a court.
Yes, a court, a kind of court,
Okay.
and a lot of officers that were quite in love with Marshal de Lattre, and
I believe he referred to him as Le Roi Jean. So the
yes,
King Jean.
He had this nickname of Roi Jean, the King, because there was a court around him, and everybody in this court thought that there was belonging of to a family, a kind of family, and there was at that time Leclerc's family, there was a de Lattre family, there was a Juin family, and Beaufre was very close to de Lattre. He was his éminence grise. He was a kind of private counselor, and this link with Le Roi Jean was very, very strong. But at the same time, so he took from de Lattre this intuition, this coup d'œil, the genius that everybody recognizing to de Lattre. But at the same time, he was the one that making this genius into papers, into staff works, into the mechanics to be translated in orders to the troops. I mean, Beaufre was at the first place to understand that you can have intuitions, coup d'œil, génie, but you have to use the military techniques to make it understandable to all the forces. And he was the one to make the bridge between this very genius commander and the troops that he had under command.
Just to explain for the audience, coup d'œil is French for basically a glance, and I think that the idea is that the born commander can, at a glance, sort of size up a situation and intuitively respond. So it's not about sitting and running your algorithms and calculating and collecting data. It's just like you see it and you feel it and you know it. So it's
Yes.
I believe maybe this goes back to Napoleon. This sort of idea, the exalted coup d'oeil, this ability of the commander to be able to do this, and Lattre is seen as sort of a paradigm or a paragon of that kind of leadership.
Absolutely, and I think we find also this coup d'oeil in Clausewitz's work, because Clausewitz was writing his book observing Napoleon against Napoleon in a certain way, and Napoleon was the archetype of this military genius, and Clausewitz wrote that the genius is probably a mix of coup d'oeil, the ability of taking a situation, and at the same time determination. It is coup d'oeil and determination. That is the kind of genius. But this military genius is also, and I think Beaufre was absolutely sure of this, and it was probably the sense of the answer he made to Brodie in 1963. The military genius, he is the product of military experience. It is also because you have to go through a lot of operations, a lot of battles, that your mind is able to take to seize and to take very rapidly what is going on in a situation. So Lattre had really this ability to this sensibility. And one thing that is very interesting in Beaufre character too, he was very sensible. He was the one that was playing piano, he was writing, he was drawing, he was an artist. And you probably know that his son and his daughter are artists now. And so it's very interesting to notice that this sensibility, a fleur de peau, we say in French, very skinny sensibility, is part of the military genius, because he's able to understand the situation in the more complex ways. And if you only go through the complexity with a technical perspective, you will lose yourself probably. And it is part of the Cartesian thinking, that you have to analyze every part, but there is a moment you have to be able to go up and to make a synthesis. So this is part of Cartesian perspective, and Beaufre is very, very interesting in that way, because he has this specific Cartesian part of him that is making the job, cutting everything into pieces and trying to analyze it in a staff perspective. But at the same time, he's able to taking into account the coup d'oeil of the military commander that is probably going to change completely the orders. But the staff works is giving material, is giving elements for the decision of the commander. And Beaufre was the one making this bridge between the staff and Jean de Lattre. And he wrote in his memoir that sometimes he went into de Lattre room at 3 or 4 in the morning, and to explain to the commander what the staff was going on, and using the works of the staff, de Lattre was able to take some decisions, and most of the time not the one that has been proposed by the staff, but the staff work was part of his ability to decide. So they are the both sides.
Thank you. So that concludes part 1 of this 2-part interview that I did with General Hervé Pierre. Please stay tuned for part 2, in which General Pierre and I discuss the Suez Crisis and the significance of the Suez Crisis for the thinking of General Beaufre. Thank you.